If you're a fan of movies, movie scores, or vinyl, this channel might be for you. Welcome to Popcorn and Vinyl, the channel dedicated to movies, film scores, and of course, vinyl, and a combination of those things therein. At times I will be discussing movie reviews, soundtrack reviews, general discussion about certain scores. Often that will be those scores on vinyl and their different pressings, as well as just other releases of film soundtracks, including digital releases, CD releases, and just any albums or scores that I would like to talk about that week. Sometimes they'll be themed around a particular franchise, and other times it will just be one-off things. And some maybe kind of appear random in time, but it's just something that I want to feature at that time. Now, I've been a fan of movie scores for almost as long as I can remember, ever since I was a kid. In fact, one of my very first albums that I would listen to on a regular basis was the Lion King soundtrack. I would actually sign that out of the public library every couple of weeks whenever it was available, because it was very hot at the time. And instead of listening to the actual songs and stuff, I would actually always gravitate towards the film score by Hans Zimmer. And I really love the sort of African-themed music, and my favorite piece, in fact, is when Simba is running back to Pride Rock. Now, kind of moving along on my journey of soundtracks, the next one I kind of got into, without even realizing it, was I was actually gifted the Titanic film soundtrack when I was in grade 6. And I was actually a really big fan of the Titanic, which was kind of a weird thing to be into, but I just got into all these documentaries. I actually won like a public speaking competition based on my speech on the Titanic, which was pretty awesome. However, then the movie came out afterward, and people knew I was this big Titanic buff, so they actually got me that soundtrack. And sure enough, once you go past Celine Dion, you do get James Horner's beautiful score. And I took her to see Mr. Murdoch. And then the kind of final step, or the one soundtrack that really kind of got me into it permanently, where I'm like, okay, this is a genre I like, is a friend of mine in grade 7. He came over, he brought this CD, he's like, dude, you gotta listen to this. I'm like, okay, sure, sounds good. And he puts in this thing, and it's like testosterone awoke in my body, and I just went crazy over this. And I had not seen the movie. It was an action movie score. It was exciting. It was thrilling. And that's kind of what got me hooked. And that was the Rock soundtrack by Hans Zimmer, Nick Lenny Smith, and Harry Gregson Williams. So that's kind of the three main ones that kind of got me started. And then as I progressed, it was really kind of like a John Williams phase early on. Part of that was just because I was a huge Star Wars fan, so I got into Star Wars, and the very first CD I ever bought was actually John Williams conducts the Star Wars Trilogy. So that kind of gave me a little bit of all of the 3 original movies, a little taste of that, and that propelled me into all the other John Williams work. Obviously, I always loved Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones, all those exciting action movies as a kid growing up. That sort of shaped my initial score foundation. And from there, I sort of learned and went into a broader approach. There was more like artsy films that I would get into, smaller scores, a little more subtle, but it was those big blockbusters that got me first into it. And what's awesome, I think, about soundtracks now is back then, there weren't really a lot of people to talk about it with, whereas now there's all these incredible online communities, some with more arguments than others, but you're able to talk about this awesome hobby with all these people that you didn't even know existed. Early in the 90s, even just trying to find soundtracks in stores, the CDs, was nearly impossible. You would go and they would have kind of the main popular movies at the time. They'd have the Armageddon soundtrack, not the score, or like Romeo and Juliet or whatever. I own it now, obviously, because I would take what I could get. But now we just have this plethora of music available, whether you buy stuff on Amazon or Discogs, wherever. There's all these places where you can get it, which is phenomenal. And the beautiful thing, and there's the vinyl resurrection, and we're seeing more and more releases come out of that because more people are interested in that hobby. That's fueling more and more releases that we've never had before. there's people like Waxwork, record labels like Waxwork, Mondo, who are releasing all this awesome stuff. And it's like a golden era, I think, for soundtrack collectors anyways, where we have all this stuff available at our disposal. If you're not a vinyl person, that's fine. Now we're getting, high resolution digital downloads, absolutely lossless. You can get, nice 2 CD sets if you're still into the CD game. They're releasing, releases that have the full gamut of music from that film that they hadn't previously released. So it's an incredible time, and it's very exciting to be a soundtrack listener and collector. So I hope you join me on this journey as I talk about different film scores, and I encourage you to share with me how you got involved and what scores you're into. Now, the one thing to note about me is I am not formally musically trained. I don't have a music background at all. I don't play an instrument. This is merely from a appreciation standpoint. So, there are technical points where I may not understand. I may use things incorrectly, but really my analysis and my review just comes from an appreciation standpoint where, this is music that I love and this is how it impacts me. It may be a very different experience for you, and that's totally cool. And you could share that as well. So in the coming weeks, look forward to seeing more reviews. I will be going over specific vinyl releases, and I think it's appropriate that episode 1 be Star Wars episode 4, A New Hope. But really, I think for a lot of people, that's what kicked off their love of soundtracks, or their kind of growth and appreciation of it. That's kind of what got them into it, and then they discovered more. Star Wars was a big influence for me, and I'm sure many others. So that's kind of the first one that I will tackle, and we'll take it from there. So I hope you guys enjoy the episodes, and I look forward to sharing the scores with you guys. Take care.